everybody. How's everybody doing?
Not allowing me to.
Good. We're so glad you're here. I'm Leslie Fields. I am the Director of the Environmental Justice and Community Partnerships Program at the Sierra Club. I also direct the Healthy Communities Program at the Sierra Club in Washington, D.C. And it's great to see old and new friends here. And we really appreciate your interest in this topic. We know there's a lot of other topics that you all could be at. And so we really appreciate you guys coming by our session. I think it's going to be an excellent session. We've got some fantastic experts, and they're all good old friends, and not old in age, but just wisdom and humor and great experiences that we hope to look for. And so this session is about using settlements to address environmental justice concerns in communities. And these gentlemen have been doing this work for a very long time, and have had some great stories to share about how they've worked with communities and constructed settlements to benefit the communities, whether it's pollution reduction possibilities or clean energy possibilities, and hopefully there'll be some models that you can take back to the folks you're working with. And so I'm going to have them speak each, about 15 minutes or so, and then open it for Q&A and a good discussion. So I look forward to your participation, and want to make sure everybody's, okay. I don't think, we do have a mic. All right. So I don't know if we kind of need it, but we do have a mic in the room, and I will keep time as best as I can so that we stay on track, and I will be, flagging people down. But I'll start just from my left, if Louie, you don't mind. Louie Miller directs the Sierra Club in Mississippi. He's here all the way from Jackson, Mississippi. And he's a dear, dear friend. He's an outstanding colleague. He has been in Mississippi doing the Lord's work in a really, 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 really tough place. It's Mississippi, y'all. Okay? Really.
You can do it there, you can do it anywhere.
Yeah, and has put his body on the line, his reputation on the line many times for environmental justice communities and economic justice and workers. I really bonded with Louie after Katrina, and he was a huge advocate for the communities of Mississippi who were being overlooked after Katrina. Katrina was really blew out Mississippi too. A lot of, rightfully so, attention was given to New Orleans, but much of that was a man-made disaster because the levees broke, as you all well know, but Mississippi got wiped. And what happened afterwards, how the money was stolen by Haley Barbour to build a port and the casinos, and Louie was just huge during that fight with folks in Gulfport. And then to his left is my good friend, compadre. We get together and just cackle, sometimes. For Tutman, he is the Patuxent Riverkeeper, but he's more than that. He's really about his land and community where he grew up on, and his farm that he still lives on, that was in his family for many generations. And was also a global citizen, and he's going to talk about a recent settlement that he's still involved in, but he's working with communities all over Maryland, Patuxent River. I've learned a lot from him. He's taken me out on the river, and it's a beautiful, beautiful river, and he's the only African American in the Riverkeeper Alliance, right? You're still the only black one? All the Riverkeepers, all around the country. He's it. And that's another conversation. Okay. And then my good friend Ramon Palencia-Calvo, he's with Chispa-MD, Maryland. He's there leading conservation voters. He's a powerhouse here in the state of Maryland. And we're very excited. Ramon has always been a faithful supporter and participant of this conference from day one. And it's just great, continues to support and his involvement in this conference and the great work, you're hearing about the work that you're doing. So we appreciate you being here too. Okay, So Louie, can you start us off and just tell us about the big Kemper fight and what it is and what happened?
Sure. And how long do I have?
All right, Louie,
Long
you
with
got.
these Southern boys.
Yeah, I know
Need
how
to
you
put
get.
a
I know how you get.
Timekeeper.
I know. So I'm gonna give you 15 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, that's plenty.
Okay,
I'm
great.
gonna pass these out real quick. This is a case study.
Yeah.
So that, you can follow along. I'm gonna track down that. But I want to thank Leslie for inviting me. This is my first time here, and it's an honor to be here and talk about the work that we're doing in Mississippi. As I've often said, there are two types of Mississippians: those who can't wait to leave, and those who are foolish enough to stay and try and change the place. So I obviously fall into the latter category. So this Kemper Clean Coal case study is a 10-year event, campaign that we waged against pretty much some pretty insurmountable odds. This was something that was being pushed across the political spectrum, from the Obama administration to Haley Barbour, who just got mentioned as the honorable thief in command in Mississippi, former RNC chairman, former governor, and the guy that invented, in a large sense, the pay-to-play with the K Street lobbyists. Still has a firm called BGR, Barber, Griffin, and Rogers here in D.C. So he's also the lobbyist, longtime 20-year plus lobbyist for Southern Company. And for many of y'all who may not be familiar with Southern Company, it's a very embedded utility operating as a monopoly in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, with subsidiaries called Mississippi Power, Alabama Power, Georgia Power, and then until recently Gulf Power, which controlled pretty much the panhandle of Florida. And interestingly enough, they sold off Gulf Power, which I say is selling your seed corn, in order to pay for the debt that was incurred on Kemper. So, but let me just say that that's a pretty stacked deck when you're looking at those odds. And this also is interestingly a project that was funded in part by the Department of Energy through a number of grant funds. It went so far as to be considered the ready-to-deploy cornerstone for the Clean Power Plan. And having said that, we had a lot of internal discussions along the way with Sierra Club and other environmental groups as to why we were opposing this project. But it, in effect, was something that was going to penalize the people of Mississippi. It started out at $1.8 billion. You're dealing with one of the poorest states in the nation, some of the poorest ratepayers in the nation, who are already toting a pretty hefty monthly utility bill. And when we looked at this, we were just like, wait a minute, you know, $1.8 million on 189,000 customers is a whack. And by the time this project the plug was pulled on this project, it was up to $7.5 billion, making it the most expensive power plant ever built in the United States. And with a small customer base of 189,000 customers, that was somewhere around 60 to 70% hike in a utility bill. So part of our organizing on this was to get the word out, which was very, very difficult in the sense that the company had basically spent millions of dollars promoting this project, One of my lobbyist friends in the Capitol called me the Maytag repairman because I was the loneliest guy in town. Nobody would, when I was coming down the hall, people would suddenly, dart into the bathroom or a side room and go, we don't need to be seen around you. In fact, one of my longtime friends, state senator, told me that he said, look, I just want to give you some advice. This was early on in the process, that you guys are, we like you, but we like the power company a lot more because these guys have been really good to us up here and they don't ask us for a lot. And he said, I would suggest you find another rabbit to chase. So, having said all that, we were able to try and break through, which was a very difficult task because they had, in essence, bought a blackout of news media. Because when you spend millions of dollars in a very small media market like Mississippi, it's pretty easy to get that type of response out of the media, because it's like, the DOE, the Secretary of Energy's for the project. You've got Southern Company for the project. You've got everybody in between for the project, and it's like, what do you whining about? So. Getting through that was an interesting process, and how we broke the seal on that was we challenged the PSC, the Public Service Commission, is the agency that oversees, administrative agency that oversees the certificate on any power plants that are, it's a quote, regulated monopoly. And so they have to go through the PSC. And in the meantime, what we did after they made the error of changing the certificate within a 30-day period from giving them most of what they wanted to giving them everything they wanted, we challenged that because there was no basis in fact for doing so, other than the power company said, this is what we want, and do it. And at the time, the power companies, I don't know how it is in other states, but I can well imagine if you've got a monopoly utility, they pretty much control the playing field in PSCs. And this was a 2-to-1 vote, 2-to-1, 2-to-1, 2-to-1. So we at least had a commissioner on there that wasn't buying what they were selling. But so we challenged that. And after a year and a half of going through the lower court and then going to the Mississippi Supreme Court, the Sierra Club won a 9-0 verdict out of a ultra-conservative state Supreme Court, overturning the validity of the certificate. So they voided that. That sent them back to the drawing board. And it was a very, I won't say simple case, but it was a fundamental breach of what their responsibilities are, and the court ruled that they were arbitrary and capricious in issuing the amended certificate. So that kind of, suddenly we went from, the gnat that's around their head, the black fly in their Chardonnay, to being a real scary thing for the power company, because they were dumbfounded as we were. I think that we had to pull the smelling salts out before it was over with for me and our attorney that Leslie knows very well, Robert Weigel, out of Ocean Springs, Mississippi. But having said all that, that kind of put us into the driver's seat, and suddenly the media is going, so where's the problem here? And we were able to start hammering, and at that time they were getting in cost overruns, they were getting into time delays. In fact, right now they are under their second investigation, this time by the by DOJ, the Department of Justice, for basically cooking books. And so it ain't over yet as to where this will ultimately land. But having said that, you know, Mississippi Power walked on water. They got the lights on after Katrina. That was no short task. So they were golden up to that point. So having said all that, the team that we put together on the ground consisted of our ELP attorney, Andrew Isod, Robert Weigel, a heroic group of volunteers and community leaders from across the state, including Ruth Story from the Gulfport NAACP, Kathy Eglin from the National Climate Change NAACP, residents in Kemper County, such as Barbara Carrera, which I always say, sure, her line was some things just aren't for sale. It's third generation living on a piece of land that was gonna get dug up. Because there was, in addition to the power plant, this was a lignite power plant. And if any of y'all know, lignite is like, there's a reason they don't burn lignite. It's because it's a horrible fuel stock, particularly in the southeast where it's got 80% water content. But, so there was a 45 square mile strip mine associated with this, and it would be opened in different cells, but at the same time, they were basically ripping people off. Very predatory practices on the locals there. And so we had a campaign of, and believe it or not, this was not in Mississippi Power Service territory. This was outside. So we had two different kind of campaigns on parallel tracks. But our slogan became dirty, expensive, and unnecessary, and became the drumbeat of the campaign. And it's amazing if you can break things down into a soundbite, dirty, expensive, and necessary. This was when became the mantra for our campaign, and we hit them every month. We had cost overruns, so it was sort of like, got to a point where it's like shooting fish in a barrel. And going, oh, how much are we over this month? And I mean, there were some phenomenal cost overruns to rack up $7.5 billion, as you can well imagine. But we used what I consider a four-prong attack, which is legal, legislative, administrative, and on-ground organizing. And I think all those components are necessary to cover all those bases in order to be able to effectively change the tide. And I've talked about some of the results, the 9-0 vote. We had a successful appeal to the second certificate. The CEO of Mississippi Power was actually fired. The vice president of generation was fired. You know, it's like the head coach. You got to fire all the assistant coaches before the head coach gets fired. So this was kind of that sort of lineup. Okay, you're next. And the Southern District Commissioner, who was owned lock, stock, and barrel by the power company, resigned midstream and is in his second term because he represented primarily the district that was going to be affected by the huge rate hikes, and this was something that he just decided to cut his losses and leave. It also resulted in the election of a pro-consumer clean energy PSC, and Kemper was the narrative that took us from 2-1 to 3-0. And in 2014, the PSC finally pulled the plug on this, and the shareholders of Southern Company ended up eating $6.5 billion of the $7.5 billion. And they have a book, if you ever get bored and have insomnia, there's a book that's written called Big Bets by Southern Company, written by some of their own, but we call this Big Bets Gone Bad. But in conclusion, I'm going to cover what we were able to parlay this into, but as I say, Six Flags would have paid good money for a ride like this. And in turn, we took on the most intransient, politically connected utility in the nation. They do a lot of the work on the federal level as well to block renewables and energy efficiency and all the things that we want to see happen. And we were able to successfully strangle, pardon my graphics here, strangle the concept of clean coal in the cradles, because this was going to be the flagship for the next generation of coal plants. And in the meantime, the economics of coal and the economics of renewables, did this. And so as a result of that, by the time this thing died an ugly death, it was the economics were there to support renewables and fracked gas, of course. But which is a whole nother story. But anyway, we used Mississippi Power and Southern Company wanted to settle with us really, really bad, right? And get this, get this guy and the rest of them out of their hair. Which at that point we felt like the die was cast on what was going to happen with this project. So that it was not going to ever successfully run as advertised. So we used our diversity, equity, and inclusion principles that are a guidance for us in the Sierra Club, and we were able to extract $7.5 million in energy efficiency for low-income households that were located within the Southern District, or the Mississippi Power District. We also got $7.5 million in for a high-profile, replicable renewable energy demonstration, which is basically solar on schools, that would provide educational opportunities for students as well. And the second, there were two settlements because these guys, when they timed us out, only timed us out for 3 years, and this project kept going. So we were able to get back in, and we were able to extract $3 million for Mississippi's first ever low-income community solar project, which we're still in the process of putting that piece together. But and in the meantime, we were able to have three coal plants, one in Alabama in Greene County, and one which is not too far from where Kemper is located, and then Plant Watson on the coast, which is one of the top 10 nastiest coal burners in the country. So we were able to retire 1,445 megawatts of coal-fired power, and that reduced mercury emissions by over 1,200 pounds annually. So that was a good one. And importantly, Plant Watson is located in North Gulfport, which is, as Leslie has been one of our great advocates and supporters down there, historic African-American community that has suffered tremendously from the health effects of coal plant pollution. And last but certainly not least, the 45 square mile mine has now been shut down and is being returned to through environmental restoration to what it was before. We also were able to get Mississippi Power to not oppose a net metering rule, which I don't want to get in the weeds too much here, but you have to have net metering in order to provide rooftop solar for residences and businesses. And so we were able to put through a net metering rule. And we got something that I think is critically important that I don't think has been done anywhere else, and it may seem insignificant in some people's eyes, but we felt like it was a huge lick, was that in doing the solar tariff, there would be a 2 cent per kilowatt for low-income households to invest in rooftop solar. which is equivalent to retail rates. And up till then, Mississippi was one of 5 states that did not have a net metering rule, and rooftop solar was, quote, prohibited. So I'll leave it at that. Thank y'all, and I'm sure get some questions after.
Thank you, Louie. It was, almost 10 years, right? Heroic work. And we're very proud of you and the community folks and the coalition down there. You still have a lot more to do, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah. It's not over. All right, thanks. Next up is Fred Tutman.
So I want to lay a little groundwork before I talk specifically about the civil rights case that we were involved with seeing settled. I want to say that I don't like the idea of settlements generally because they make me think of compromise. And I'm uncomfortable with the notion that in a negotiation where there's our communities involved, it's very hard to have a settlement where at least somebody doesn't get disenfranchised. The parties who are a part of the settlement obviously are typically the prime beneficiaries. So I see settlements as kind of a last resort generally in our work. We have settled litigation in the past, where we were in a transaction, as plaintiffs negotiating with a defendant. That's a much narrower type of outcome. But settling an administrative complaint where there's a community harm associated with it is a little complex. And bear with me, philosophically, we try to do at Patuxent Riverkeeper primarily what we think of as transformative work. We look at systems, we look at big picture. We know we can't prosecute every issue, case, problem, issue in our, in the watershed. So a transformative solution, where we look at things in a holistic way, where we try to change an underlying system, is a much more efficient, at least in theory, and economical approach to it. Transactional work, where you're just trying to get a specific thing or deal with a specific matter, tends to leave out quite a lot. And like I said, someone's going to be PO'd at the end because someone's going to get disenfranchised. That said, as a last resort, when either we cannot litigate for some reason, we don't even have a clear cause of action or some other avenue, we're very concerned that the parties to the settlement discussions are representative of the general community. In the case of the civil rights case we filed in Brandywine, and I should say Neil Gorley is here, just to say hi. And Neil was instrumental in writing the complaint that created this settlement eventually. Although I would say that Neil at Earth Justice and Patuxent Riverkeeper, we don't own this settlement, the EPA does. In the end, we ended up in a negotiation posture with state agencies over the wide bunch of burdens that existed in Brandywine, trying to find some, if not transformative, at least some transactional stop measure, because there was a speeding train of additional power plants, additional burdens, additional problems heading for the community. And this seemed to be a means of actually trying to slow that train down at least. So a local community organization invited Patuxent Riverkeeper, asked Patuxent Riverkeeper to participate in an administrative complaint, basically, the civil rights complaint that ultimately Neil at Earth Justice draft. And the negotiation unraveled over disagreements amongst the parties over who in the community was a legitimate negotiator. It's exactly the scenario we had hoped to avoid. In our case, Patuxent Riverkeeper, we had a number of ties to the community, including board members who live in the affected area, who have been working on the issues in the affected area. I should also say that BTB Coalition, the other parties to this negotiation, has their own, I think, either a workshop or a seminar at this event sometime today. And if you're interested, you might want to kind of hear their take on it as well. I don't know that it competes with this session. I think it's later in the day. So that said, at the end of it, at the end of the negotiation, when things began to unravel, I, at Patuxent Riverkeeper, felt compelled to sign what we had negotiated, but the other parties would not sign. Actually, the state signed, we signed, BTB Coalition would not sign. And frankly, they are directly affected in a particular way. And so there really isn't anything in what the EPA eventually released that remediates the community or provides them with anything to really address the original issues. It does a lot of interesting transformative stuff in terms of how notification is done in the state of potential power plant sightings. It does do some things to try to change the underlying structure at the Public Service Commission in terms of how they do siting. I saw the outcome as fortuitous because it does provide a springboard for us to go back and do some legislative work as a follow-on to try and tighten up the stuff that's missing. One thing that's problematic, for those of you that, I'm assuming there might be a few people who might have actually looked at the EPA settlement, the words cumulative impacts appear nowhere in that. And I believe the state has an unwillingness, and most states probably do, to look at cumulative impacts, because if they did, probably nobody would want this anywhere. The cumulative impacts are pretty daunting for some of these industrial projects, and full disclosure of the impacts would be not in the interest of people who want to see these things built, which incidentally includes the jurisdictions often enough where they are built. There's a smoking gun that in our instance, where Brandywine was just getting Superfund sites, coal burning power plants, gas plants, multiple gas plants. I think Sokovie on stage this morning mentioned there were 3 in a 3-mile radius, and there are a bunch of other burdens as well. But I mean, again, the area had become a sacrifice on, but the key point is that the county really wanted this tax base. They made it clear this was going to be the largest source of industrial tax base the county, Prince George's County, had ever seen. And so, in the end, I think what really leveraged both the EPA's willingness to settle as well as the state was national media attention and impending election. When all this happened in the last election cycle and the weeks and months leading up to it, negotiations and the mediation part went for almost a year. Very contentious, 25, 26 drafts of a settlement agreement, only to find at the end that we couldn't get enough consensus from all the parties to sign. But I do believe that the Hogan administration in Maryland did not want this hanging over their heads. I think the county backed away from this a bit when they started seeing themselves on television being portrayed as, being pretty egregious in terms of how they go about doing things. I mentioned it in the last session I was in too, but along the way, we had some other parallel litigation and some zoning matters that we handled. The county began to argue that it was impossible to have an environmental justice disparity in Prince George's County at all, because the officiating body of the county was predominantly black, and the county's predominantly black. That was their logic. I mean, it's as crazy as that sounds, and it is crazy talk. That's what the county was pinning its hopes to. Now, what I heard today on stage from new county members, again, there's been an election, and we have a new bunch of folks in there, was a little different, although I didn't hear much awareness of what was going on in Brandywine. I heard some confusion about how many plants and where and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure we changed any of those paradigms. But like I said, I do think the take home from this is manifold. On one hand, the state, I don't think I've ever seen a civil rights complaint of this sort before. I don't know if they've seen other civil rights. Actually, I know they have, because I know there's this whole controversy that's still ongoing about Negro Mountain. I don't know if you've been following. Yeah. I don't know if that's a civil rights complaint, but it is a racially charged, or let's say, it has some contours in terms of the state kind of changing its behavior in order to not disenfranchise, let's say, this particular group of folks. But I think the CNN coverage, national coverage of the Brandywine issues, for those of you who've seen that, was enormously helpful in galvanizing the county's willingness to even talk about this issue. I worked in television before I did this for a living, and I worked in investigative news teams. I actually worked for 60 Minutes for a couple of years, in fact. And I know for a fact, when you have an adversary that sees themselves in an unfavorable way on national television, the first thing that flies through their mind is, my God, my mother saw that. It's very personal, even though it's about a system, about a government, whatever. These guys, I'm being portrayed in the worst possible light, and it galvanizes their willingness to try and at least fix that problem. It may not be your problem, right? But you've made your problem a public relations problem for them. And I think that is a very useful take home in this instance. And I believe it also empowered or activated other citizens, because I've seen other civil rights complaints emerge since then. It's a new tool, or newly aware, people have become newly aware that this is an administrative route that is a lot different actually than litigating, and the tools needed to do it actually a little more attainable than trying to hire a legal team and going and actually file a lawsuit. So I guess at the end of the day, Brandywine still has a lot of hurt, a lot of woe. However, there is a civil rights settlement in their name that is out there that provides great benefit, potentially, to others around the state, and so we'd like people to become aware of that. And of course, we'd like to build a strong movement to follow on to tune up some of the stuff in this civil rights settlement that would give deeper power to other communities facing any number of burdens that are coming down the pike. Because like I said, nobody would want these projects if they saw the full magnitude of the impacts. That's exactly why these are controversial processes. That's why they really don't credit citizen knowledge on this stuff, because I think they know very well that they're untenable burdens in many instances. So let's see what I left out. Oh, something that's important to point out with respect to doing representative work. So this issue shone a spotlight on Brandywine, like I said, national, statewide, and so on. It drew in a lot of environmental groups who wanted some of that sunshine, and they began to compete with the voice of the local community. We actually found ourselves in forums, and still do, where our opponents argue who legitimately speaks for Brandywine, which is shocking when you consider where this started and how this got rolling was to empower the community, only to find the community now has to fight to find its voice over the plethora of other folks that have come in that saw an opportunity to link Brandywine's fate to pipelines and global warming and coal campaigns and all kinds of other stuff that tangentially probably have some connection, but don't empower the local community. Have no genesis whatsoever, no connection to the local community's needs or wants. And it short circuits the ability of the local community to assert their own voice. Because now they gotta take a number or stand in line or petition somebody at a national environmental organization to bring their issue to the top.
Greg,
So-
could you, excuse me, please describe Brandywine, where it is, and,
Sure.
you know, the composition and, you know.
Yeah, so
some of the
Brandywine
history.
is
Not
unincorporated.
everybody's from the area.
Yeah, it's a good point. So Brandywine's an unincorporated area that is a suburb of Washington, D.C. It is south of Upper Marlboro. It historically was just a historic district that began, like many places in Prince George's County, maybe around the state, mushroomed out into a sprawling coastal area. So true Brandywine is actually a fairly small place. Brandywine Coastal District is a vast area that brings in all kinds of other folks that may not even have a connection to the historic original district that was Brandywine, known as Brandywine BTB, Thomas Burton Brandywine, which was a predominantly rural black farming community, basically. So, what can I say about Brandywine? It's got a ton of industrial burdens. Like I said, I think it's emerged as a sacrifice zone in Prince George's County in terms of where to put onerous, unwanted impact. This land is cheap, zoning fairly permissive, a lot of other industrial stuff there to be found. Pretty horrific for folks that have a different heritage with the area. Remembered as a very peaceful, kind of sleepy, pastoral place.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, lots of things that come to mind from your presentation, but we'll hold until Ramon. Can you share with us?
Absolutely. So again, Ramon, Chispa-MD, for those that might not be familiar with Chispa. Chispa is a program of the Maryland Legal Conservation Voters, and we work with Latino communities to further their voices, their power on the environmental justice, equity realm. It was started in 2014, and it's part of a network of Chispa state programs. We have a program in Maryland, we have in Connecticut, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and a national office. And they all started 2014 or after that. For us, it's a different situation. We got the litigation, the case was already settled, and there was a amount of money coming to Maryland, and what we tried to do is how can we use that money to benefit the community, to follow the intent of the settlement and not be for a pet project for the administration. So we're talking about the Volkswagen settlement. As you all probably know, a few years back they had the amazing so-called clean diesel vehicles, and at the end of the day they were caught cheating national emission testing, and they were slapped a big fine, and it was divided in several pots, and one of these pots of money was it was to be received by states to reduce emissions, diesel emissions from the transport sector. That's what it was, diesel emissions from the transport sector. So the way we work our model in theory of change for Chispa is, we work with community members, we build their power. We provide some tools, some trainings, and we create promotoras, which are the community leaders that engage the communities, that create committees. So when this came out, we met with promotores and some of the committees and discussed this is an opportunity that we have, not just in Maryland, but in all the states. This is an opportunity that we have. How do you guys see this moving forward? Is there anything that you want to discuss? And we talked a number of ideas, and we wanted to make sure that the money was for the community. We want to make sure that it benefits the people that are suffering the most. In this case, we identified our children, low-income communities, communities of color, disproportionately suffer the effects of air pollution. So we thought that that was very important to take into consideration. And we also thought, this is a 10-year settlement. The money is going to be here for 10 years, so let's try to find something that is going to have that continuity. So at the end of the day, we thought about the Clean Buses for Healthy Unions campaign, make sure that part of that settlement goes to transition diesel buses to electric, to zero emissions electric school buses. As we know, those buses have a time span of 12 years, so I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about transitioning buses now that are gonna pass some of the children of the school kids that are helping on this campaign. They are moving forward this campaign. So we thought that that was the way to move forward the campaign. So yeah, this is started as a small campaign, again, moved by students, by parents, by community members. We started very slow. We were able here in Maryland to pass a couple of local bills. One it was, I remember the students going to the Majors, Regional Discounted Majors Association, and advocating heavily, come on, support this campaign, let's us all together, Governor Hogan, to commit some of those funds for that purpose, and they were able to pass a resolution. They got all excited, they continued building that power, and they brought it to, we have our largest bases in Prince George's County, so we did a lot of work there in this county. They engaged the council, and they were also able to put forward another resolution that got passed, again, supporting the campaign and requesting that the governor pay attention to this and spend the funds on electric school buses. So we saw that from this small local, it continued escalating. We use town halls, press events, of course, social media, direct lobbying, canvassing to engage community members. And we started this work in 2017. Last summer, it came out the first draft of the settlement, and basically it committed $12 million for those affected communities and divided in 3 different pots of money. One for public transportation to transition diesel vehicles to alternative fuels, which of course is electric, but it also has compressed natural gas, which we were not very excited about that. The other part of money was for localities to do the same transition, and the other was for school buses. So that was kind of like a victory, but it wasn't enough what we really wanted, because we saw the possibility of, this settlement is kind of like choosing technologies. If you're going to compare the price of a new propane gas with a new electric gas, there's a huge difference. So we thought that some school districts were just going to apply for compressed natural gas or propane. So continue pressing the administration, the Department of the Environment, which is the agency that was finalizing the settlement. And at the end of the day, the settlement came out in February, and it increased the amount of money for affected communities that are that don't meet air quality national air standards, and to almost over $50 million. That is 20% of the entire settlement, which we thought it was a good amount to start with. And it also created a special provision of $500,000 to just electric school buses, so they can apply up to $5 million for electric school buses, but at least $600,000 are for electric, regardless. So that was very positive. But the story here, I think, is how this campaign was able to bring this need. I mean, we're talking about children. We send our children to school. They are received by a diesel bus. They get into the bus. They drive for 20, half an hour, more than that. They're bringing those fuels from diesel. The concentrates on those cabins, or the brains are still developing. The lungs are still developing. Super harmful for them. Is what Dr. Wilson was saying. We are robbing them for the bright future. Who else? I mean, that's the logical thing. We should be advocating for them. And it create this momentum. I remember back in the day when we started at Montgomery County and Prince George's County, they were not interested in applying for any of these funds, any of these buses, and they both applied for electric school buses, so that was a victory for those families that fought for this. And in the process of this, as I said, we engaged many stakeholders. And this year in Maryland, we were able to introduce a state bill. It was a very ambitious state bill, but we wanted to force that conversation on elected officials. It was a bill that would require that every new bus starting in 2022 be electric, and for school districts and for contractors 2025 to give you some extra time. Of course, we didn't think anything was going to happen. We just wanted to force the conversation. However, it forces school districts to take a position to tell the public, we're not doing that, or we're doing this for this reason. So we have something to start working with. But at the end of the day, we have a number of organizations, community members. You're here, Mountain Air Force, great partner on this road, and we were able to pass this bill that it got amended, but basically it created a fund, the mechanism to house funds to create a program to transition diesel to electric school buses, and also has a mandate, and it requires that the Department of Transportation and the Department of Environment, they both work with school districts on the technical aspect of this transition. We know that for many school districts, this is where do we start, how do we do it, what kind of buses are these, trainings and things like that. So now we have that covered through the settlement and that fund that creates is going to house it's going to have another $600,000 right now, but it gives us that opportunity as we move forward to request funds to be committed to that fund to continue this transition in Maryland. And so that's how it escalated to the state level, and now that bill is going to become law tomorrow. It's been scheduled to be signed tomorrow, so that's super exciting news. And moving forward, we're also seeing in the Senate, the U.S. Senate, some movement for electric buses. We don't know what's the shape that it's going to take, but we are seeing that how we've been escalating that conversation. Folks in Maryland and many other states, advocating for clean buses. Electric buses was something that it wasn't part of the mainstream to do this transition, but we think that we've been, making that dent, and people are realizing this is the future. Those buses have a 10-year lifespan, 12-year lifespan, and what we do now is going to affect the children of our children most likely. So we need to be on top of that. And that's the story in Maryland, and again, how we had that opportunity, and we wanted to make sure that it benefited the community, and we also wanted to make sure that the community drives this conversation forward.
Thank you, Ramon. Great. In fact, this is great timing. So, congratulations to you and the community and the coalition, and everybody stayed on task. Man, I'm very impressed. I thought I was gonna have to do the hook.
There you go.
But no, you guys are really, really great. So I think we have about, what is it? Like 10 minutes to questions. Any questions, right? I can start some, but I see somebody in the back.
So actually,
Can you speak up?
Wilson
I can't hear you.
Oh.
Hear you.
told,
Can you stand up? Thank you.
Dr. Wilson told me to let you guys out at 1:05.
Yeah. Okay.
We have more time.
We have more time. All right, thank you. All right, any Any clarifying questions first? Yes, Reverend Malcolm.
Well, I don't know if I had a clarifying question.
Any question? Yeah.
Much as for Ramon, in your settlement, where did you factor in health as far as the community was concerned? Or was it factored in?
For us, that was the main driver, the health, make sure that,
I heard you speak about clean buses. I'm wondering, did you do anything as far as clinics or any long-term health care for the communities that are directly impacted?
so we saw ourselves as, bringing them together and kind of providing information. Many times, the community might not be community super savvy, but if there's anything that they might need to know, we'd be happy to do the research or provide any support that we can do. But yeah, I mean, for us, health was very, very important. It was front and center on how to move forward. We didn't want to do one of those pet projects that is cool and all, but it doesn't really address health disparities, health issues in the communities that we want, that we serve. That's how we saw it. Yeah.
What did you do is what I'm asking. What practically did you do?
Besides providing information,
Yeah.
so we're talking about asthma. There's the only thing that we provide is just the information, how emissions from diesel affect the health of, in this case, children and the community as a whole. What are the effects that have, if asthma, increases asthma attacks, what is the effect they have on the brain, developing brains, what other ways, in which other ways affects their health. We provide that information, but that's the extent that we did the health. Just provide the information on how it affects the health of children.
Did you have any particular challenges around language access for different communities?
So everybody at Chispa speaks is bilingual, so we were able to reach out to the Latino community in their own, language, but also taking into consideration the cultural differences. We understand that they're very busy. We understand, that might not be able to participate at events during the day. That we know that in the evening they also have the commitments. So we really try to accommodate to their schedule, accommodate of course their language, but I'm putting in terms that they can understand. Sometimes one of the barriers that we see often is the use of technical language to address these issues. So we really try to bridge that gap, that barrier, and use like the language that they could relate to.
It's Charlie.
So I just wanted to get a clarification. So in terms of the settlement itself, was there a settlement and what did that entail?
With Volkswagen? So there was a settlement, and the part that we work on, the mandate it was to reduce NOx from diesel vehicles. That was the mandate. In a way that you get the most for the money.
Right. Okay.
That's why we did have a problem with, we saw a problem with the propane school buses. They cost probably $15,000 more than a regular diesel school bus. The electric cost probably a little bit about $200,000 more.
Right.
So it was arguing for electric was challenging because you can get more propane buses for the price of an electric school bus. But at the same time, if you look at the life cycle of an electric school bus, it's going to save you on maintenance. It's going to save you on fuel. It's going to save you on health, a lot of health. And then for some reason, the administration here in Maryland, they just said, we really don't want to look into that. That's the problem of the school. If the school is going to save money, that's on them. But we're just going to straightforward emissions reduction, not NOx reduction. So that really presented a challenge for us.
Right. So it had to do with the way the money from the Volkswagen settlement was being spent in terms of what you did.
Yeah.
In terms of prioritizing.
Yeah, exactly. What are they gonna do with those 7 million here
Yeah.
in Maryland? Are they gonna use it all for administration costs, for the port in Baltimore? What are they gonna do with it? So that's.
Very good.
Yes.
Yeah, kind of, like, I think Fred kind of alluded to it. I'm kind of new to DC, took a job, and used to talk about this never get started conflict, and now it's a big thing. The big thing I'm getting with everything that's going on with, like, so now elections coming up with presidential, like, but everything, when you got the environment that we just had a discussion about the Green New Deal, how do you have and converse that talk that when you talk to policy folks or people, it's like, they think it's gonna be like one piece and they don't involve the whole community in seeing that, you know, it takes a power distribution focus of the community that, you know, you're trying to empower the community. But how do you talk to the people, like I said, bring on the community, that it's about empowering the community, especially hearing about those needs to these policy experts, these big greens. And like you said, like, you know, when the lawsuit was being addressed that, hey, like you said, some people are gonna be left out, but yet most of the community is going to be involved in the process, and how do you make that whole process systemic?
I think in the instance of Brandywine, and actually it's true for much of our work in the 7 counties that we work in, we actually work in 7 counties, which is everywhere the Patuxent goes. We actually do have pretty strong local relationships. We've actually been trying to craft community teams in all of our counties to help guide and steer our work. Not only does I think it kind of insulates us from the idea that we're kind of, you know, cowboying this stuff, which we're trying not to do, but I've decided that, frankly, as the founder, and, you know, I'm probably closer to the end than I am at the beginning, just by years, just by age, and I have a lot of time to finish this work. I do feel that longevity will be found in mentoring local community activism. We have to empower these communities to thrive and make them not so dependent on outside sources of advocacy, frankly. You know, if they outsource their advocacy, then
They outsource the results.
right, precisely, outsource the results. So it's very, very important. It has influenced whom we team with. We do not team with organizations that do not share our underlying community philosophy in that respect. It has to flow from, the power has to be exemplified from the local community. We are the vessel or the medium for that. But that's a huge, to me, kind of paradigm that guides what we do. Now, I think you're asking also kind of a more precise question, like how do we, get the politicians to, well, actually, it's easier if there's a cognizable base, right? Politicians respect that, and they react to that, and they respond to that. Now, the zen of dealing with politicians and decision makers, that stuff, is that it's impossible to get them to do anything that is contrary to their own self-interest. The problem is, their own self-interest is not what's on the website necessarily, it's not obvious. You really have to get to know what drives these particular folks, and that takes, frankly, more investment than some of these larger groups want to put into it, right? They're looking for movements to lead, not movements to exemplify, right? So there is a different energy flow that occurs. We find ourselves in conflict sometimes with people who see this as just another opportunity to franchise their environmentalism on a local community, as opposed to how do you hold up the local community's power so that you create something that's lasting and likely to take on a life of its own. So that's kind of a diffuse answer, but does that kind of get into the ballpark? But glad to talk to you. It's helpful.
Yes, Bernice.
So I have a question for Louie and for Fred, but Ramon, feel free to weigh in as well. I used to work in Mississippi in the 80s and 90s for the Center for Constitutional Rights, supporting the great Honorable Margaret Carey McCrae, who was the director of our voting rights program, and saw some incredible organizing and litigation that went on to create those voting rights victories, but also create political transformation on the ground. So, Mississippi has more Black elected officials than any state in the United States by orders of magnitude. But the percentage of Black folk in Mississippi is nowhere the percentage of Black folks in Maryland. So why is it that we can't, and so Louie, my first question for you, is there such a thing as a progressive white person in Mississippi? And if they are, what happened in the Mike Espy race? That race that said he was coming up again, right? She's coming up for re-election. She was filling an unexpired term, an unexpired term. Right. Where are the Greens and the Blacks and the Latinos, who are a bigger and bigger portion of the population in Mississippi? Fred, the same question for you. Why is it that we can't get our shit together in Maryland? Why can't we got all these people here. Everybody looks at us at this progressive state, but whenever there's a black person running statewide, Donna Edwards, don't get me started. We never seem to be able to galvanize our progressive roots. And then we re-elect a governor who gets 60% of the white Democrats. And the black person running for Senate gets 20% of the white vote, although she's a radical environmentalist, right? That's her bread and butter, but we couldn't seem to cross the line for her. So I'm just wondering, obviously it's not about counting votes anymore. How do you create the coalition that supports the kind of transformation that the Patuxent Riverkeeper is trying to bring about? Because I'm at a loss at this moment.
So it's a good question, it's a big question. Let me answer it smaller.
So Louie can talk about how we bring Mississippi into the 21st century. Okay, let's go with the 20th century. Whatever.
Kicking and screaming.
And by the way, the only way I know how to spell Mississippi is I keep humming that Bobby Gentry song in my head. The one M-I, double S-I, double S-I, double B-I. That's literally how my mind works. Look, I actually think that because I live, as you know, and work in two places, I live in both here and in North Carolina, where the environmental community is structured very, very differently. For one, I think in the DC area, in Maryland, the funding is centralized, and the movement is largely centralized around the Chesapeake Bay, and it's a perception of the Bay that makes the Bay a terminus for all of your environmental. In other words, the Bay is not holistically connected to everything else, like air, justice, climate, and things of that sort. It's just the Bay. It's a pretty limited movement, and sadly, I've concluded it's not a progressive movement. The Bay movement is a liberal movement. It is not a progressive movement. So in truth, it doesn't have the toolbox to really engage power at the level that the Patuxent Riverkeeper has. It doesn't do transformative work. In fact, it prides itself on making the best deals. Go to Annapolis and watch how these guys play. That's what they do every day. See if you can get a better deal. If you challenge their deals, that's exactly what they'll throw in your face. Can you get a better deal? So it's a let's make a deal point of view. And I believe that it's sculpted to avoid going into direct opposition with potential sources of money or power, because that is also a movement that is largely funded by corporate interests, right? Unwilling to do transformative work. They don't want to change the system, they just want the trash picked up, or the oysters brought back, or whatever single thing they want at that particular moment. So I do think there is a structural problem within Maryland, right, that I don't see in at least some other places. In North Carolina, the money's more diffused, there are more people who can fund, the atmosphere is much more collegial between at least some of the environmental groups prepared to partner and work together rather than cut each other's throats over who's going to get the last fragment of Town Creek money, for goodness sakes, right? I mean, so it's a very different local culture, and it's dominated by this Bay speak. And I'm frustrated with it, to be honest, because frankly, the Bay is connected to all of these other resources too, so how come it's not a two-way street? How come we can't get these other conditions connected to the local environmental movement? Because they don't want to touch those. You know, environmental justice is outboard and completely on its own page. Frankly, diversity is too, and I guarantee you, diversity and equality are not the same thing. It's a different conversation, diversity and equality. So that's my rant du jour, is it's a different structural movement. And we've isolated ourselves from it. I won't work with the Bay heads because there's no way to talk to these guys except, you know, about oysters and privilege and rich donors and how much money did you get from Dominion? I mean, holy cow. It's a different frame of mind than I think Patuxent Riverkeeper has.
Louie? You're not getting off the seat, my man.
Where do you want me to begin?
Well, I don't think you need to go all the way back to the Civil War, but maybe a little further than that. A little forward from that.
Well, I think as is true of a lot of states, we have seen the long reach of gerrymandering. Haley Barbour was the, you know, I told everybody that would listen 10 years, 12 years ago, whatever it was when Haley Barbour came in as governor, that this guy had one goal in mind. He was setting up these states for redistricting under the census. And that's what happened. And if you look at any of these states that had large Republican populations, they swept these states through gerrymandering. We've gone from a Democratic Senate, a Democratic House, to a supermajority, the trifecta, supermajorities in both chambers, and a governor. So, you know, we're screwed, bleeding tattooed at this point. But I will say that, as you know, it's always darkest before the dawn, and we do have, I think, a building resistance to their agenda. Although, you know, it's a challenge to empower people, particularly teachers and other groups that are, you know, being, you know, completely marginalized by this Republican agenda. And you know, the last 2 years have been, you know, up till then, these guys just sort of loitered in the hallways of the Capitol, and then we're told, you know, okay, this is what you do, okay, we'll go do it. You know, we don't have hearings anymore. We don't have subcommittees anymore. I mean, there is no process in which there is some type of debate of what the legislation does or does not do. I think having said that, things are changing. We have Jim Hood, who is the Attorney General, who's running for governor. Right now, he's leading in the polls because I think people are just really sick of their bridges falling in, this sweeping of local control, because, you know, what the Republicans want and what the Trump administration has provided them with is a roadmap to consolidate power into the hands of the legislature, take it away from, we're a home rule state, take it away from counties, take it away from cities, and have it in one-stop shop for all the corporations. Here's the two players, pay them, and it's pay to play, and you go on about your business. And I think that is starting to really wane the kind of power that they were wielding. The Republicans have primaried their lieutenant governor in this governor's race, if you can believe that, with the former Chief Justice, Bill Waller, whose daddy was governor at one time. So I think, you know, that the handwriting has been on the wall, but I think it takes a long time for constituency groups and progressives to, one, get in the same room together and not get in a, you know, some knockdown drag out, but beyond that is to work together, you know, and draft a slate of candidates that you think might actually win, and in a woefully gerrymandered legislature. So all that's happening. It's a very frustrating, and as Fred said, I don't know about the rest of y'all, I'm not getting any younger. So it's one of those things you'd like to see happen sooner than later. But I think if Hood gets in there, it will be, maybe it will break the stranglehold that they currently have on power in the state.
Is SB gonna run again? Is SB gonna run again?
I have no idea.
It's really encouraging to see you talk about the partnership between the NAACP and the club. That's a ray of light.
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, that's been a work in progress as well. So.
Thank you.
Yes, Steve.
I am a lawyer, so just want to preface my question with that comment. Is, as people who work with lawyers to get settlements, is there anything that you would have liked to see your lawyers do either better or different?
Great damn question.
We had extraordinary lawyers. We had people who really got what we were trying to do and worked harder than you might imagine. We had free lawyers too, which is even better. But no, I don't think so. I felt that they had our hearts and minds at all times. And mind you, it wasn't a legal struggle, the process. Like I said, the EPA ultimately owns this settlement, but the process that led to it was more of a brokering of personalities and relative power in the room. You know, all that fundamental stuff you do when you put a bunch of strangers in the room and say, come up with something useful, right? I mean, you have all those dynamics going, but it wasn't a legally centric process, to be honest. Even though there were lots of lawyers in the room, I don't think we were using lawyerly skills. I mean, just saying.
Fortunate, had the incredible good fortune of having worked with, I think, one of the premier environmental attorneys in the country, which is Robert White. He came out of Justice, was head of the managing attorney out of the Denver office, and he's a native Mississippian, so one of those guys that came back home. And so we've enjoyed that good fortune, and I don't think there was ever a time in which we just have a very cohesive relationship with him, and he is somebody that understands organizing, which a lot of attorneys may or may not understand organizing, may not understand environmental injustice, and so again, I want to believe that that's more pervasive than what our attorney embodies, but I don't know that. I've heard it a number of different ways, but it's something you want going. Somebody's got your back and you got their back going in on the front end, rather than trying to figure that out somewhere through the process when you realize, hey, we're not singing from the same hymn.
I think it's a really great way to end. I mean, these are, the community being upfront, community leading, coalitional work. We've heard, the court of public opinion can be very powerful. And having a strategy around the press and communications and getting that out there, and folks being able to really work together and support these communities who really they've been sacrificed. And so I want to thank our panelists. I learned a lot, and the fight continues, le continua, and we, I hope folks, I think we'll get a copy of the sign-in sheet, but I really hope folks can stay in touch with each other, because we're getting a lot of good strategies and tactics that can be used in other places. So I want to thank you all for your attendance and participation, and there's more panels to go today. Thank you.